أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمخلوقين سيدنا ونبينا وشفينا أبي القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أما بعد, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. So this is our fourth session on Islam and Europe, past, present, and future. So far, we have looked at the past. We have traced the history of interaction between Muslims and Europe, the good times, and the bad times, and the very violent times we have looked at. We have seen that for a large part of this history, the conflict has been between Christianity and Muslims. It has been Christianity's reaction to the growth of Islam. And once you define that religion as a heresy, this is not like another religion. Heresy is different from another religion, right? If it was Hinduism or something else, there would have been a different reaction. Heresy is that within yourself, you have had this problem. And so we had this history of crusades and Inquisition and Reconquista and all kinds of things with a long, these are things which are 300, 400, 500 years in duration, and all the hostility and enmity which it creates, right? Which is where some of the problems were before, and some of it is still, there is a baggage in the history here. This was followed by phenomena, again very brutal, like slavery and so on, which did not have a directly anti-Muslim component, but it had some pro-Christian component because there were a lot of missionary and a lot of other Christian justifications for slavery and for colonization. Colonization typically was promoted by things like civilizing the savages and so on. So the idea was, after the Crusades and so on, that these peoples, not all of them Muslims, but were really not civilized, and we are going to civilize them. And I remember that when apartheid was finally vanquished in South Africa, there was an interview with Bishop Tutu. Desmond Tutu was one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement, very, very intelligent and very, very jovial man. So they asked him, they said, Bishop Tutu, what do you think about the role of religion in this problem, in the apartheid problem? He said, look here, my friend. When you came, you had the Bible, we had the land. Now when you are leaving, you have the land and we have the Bible. This is of no use to us, really, because we have taken everything we had. So that was the sort of narrative, but essentially the antagonism between religions was not so virulent as it was in the times of the Crusades and so on. And then slavery followed by colonization, which was not necessarily anti-Muslim, which was now something else, which was more seeking for resources and plunder and pillage at any cost. It doesn't matter if they were Muslims or non Muslims, you would undertake those activities. However, as we saw last time, in the First World War and the Second World War, and between the wars indeed, Europe was on the back foot. In the First World War, we have reports that we had about 4, maybe 5 million Muslims fighting for Europe against Germany. In the Second World War, probably more against Germany again and Hitler. And in some places, the participation of Muslims were critical to the defeat of the Germans and their forces and their allies. And the numbers are not yet clear, but probably 250,000 Muslims were killed in the wars. Not many people know here. Nothing is said about it. 250,000 people who had really nothing to do with the war, not the cause of the war or anything, to be killed, is something which needs to be recognized, right? However, there was one major benefit out of the two wars as far as Muslims were concerned. When they came, you see, one of the main policies of colonial regimes was to convince the people there that they were inferior. They could not fight Europeans. They have to obey them and they have to service them. You can look at histories of East India Company and here, there, everywhere. This was generally the idea. Now, when they came for the war and they fought side by side, in some cases, they saw that we are better than these people in fighting. In some cases, they understood that certainly they are not less able. So when they went back home, Muslim and non-Muslim, they started to have ideas that we can get rid of these people. So this participation, just like in the First World War, for example, because there was a shortage of labor, the government, especially in the UK, for example, mobilized a lot of women. And these women now understood that they were not inferior to men or anything. So that laid the roots for the suffragette movement and the voting rights and equal rights and all that until on and on. It just enables you to think that, yes, you can do it. This was just, before that, it was just drummed into you that you cannot do it. So similarly here, of course, this was a fight to death. It wasn't like not allowing you. People realized that we can fight. And they started the anti-colonial struggle. And if you see that from 1945 onwards, from there to about 1970, 1980, most of the colonies, they gained their independence. It wasn't out of design. It was both fighting for it and also exhaustion of Europe from the war, because 45 million people were killed altogether in the Second World War. So after that, the question shifts more to how to plunder those independent countries as well. You don't want to leave them alone because you want the resources. You don't want to have their problems, but you still need the resources. So we'll come back. But now you see that religion is out of it. It's no longer a religious conflict. It's becoming a more economic conflict, a more political conflict as to the future of what the world will look like and how it will happen. But that religious background was still there, lingering, right? Now, here there are three things which we need to understand. One, for example, everybody knows, and as we discussed in the second session, that when Islam expanded, first, it brought together all the knowledge which was there in the world by utilizing it, translating it, developing it, and spreading it because of the trade routes and so on. And so this was a major contribution to the intellectual development of the world as a whole, especially Europe. All the Greek and Latin knowledge, which in the dark ages of Europe, when the church went against science altogether, so, the killing of leading scientists and so on, because they said, one of them said, for example, that the earth is round. And they said, no, the Bible says the earth is flat. And that's it. And if you say it is round, you are kafir, so you have to be executed. And this kind of crackdown, so automatically all that knowledge went out of sync altogether, right? It was the Muslims who brought it back through translations into Arabic, and then when they used these Arabic translations, later on these Arabic translations were then translated back into Latin and then fed into it, and then they developed it. Of course, we are not saying nothing happened. But if you look at the European view of what that time was now, if you ask anybody, is very strange. They say, yes, of course, the Muslims had this knowledge, but it was our knowledge which we kept with them, or was kept with them. So it's like as if I'm saying that, look, I'm going on a journey. I have some jewelry. I put it in the bank. When I come back, I go and claim it, and I take it out as it is. The bank is not going to do anything to it, apart from storing it, right? So they pretend that that's what happened to this knowledge. We kept it safe, and we translated it back. We didn't work on it, we didn't develop it, we didn't do anything to it. Therefore, essentially saying that you had no contribution to it. Thank you very much for looking after it, but that's about it. But if you look at it, that's not so. The whole idea of translating it was that we could use it and develop it, and we did. Now, if you acknowledge that, then you have to acknowledge that there is a Muslim contribution to existing intellectual heritage. Yeah. If you don't acknowledge that, you park it, and so you say, thank you very much, but no thank you. Same way with the war, as I said, with this huge contribution across the globe, there is no mention that large numbers of Muslims and non-Muslims, of course, from the colonies and everywhere else participated and sacrificed lives. And then in the Second World War, there is an even bigger sacrifice. In the Second World War, because of the strength of Germany, Hitler's Germany, Europe was on the back foot, and it was really on the verge of defeat. And therefore, they made an alliance with Stalin of the Soviet Union. And so most of the fighting in Europe was done by Russian troops. A large number of Russian troops were also sacrificed. Fine. Stalin, on the other hand, also after the war and during the war and later, cracked down badly on the Central Asian republics which were Muslims. 20 million Muslims died there from the repression of Stalin. Because of the alliance between Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, nothing was said about it. no objection, and up to today, nobody's writing and talking about it. Brushed out of history. I remember in communist countries before, probably here as well, I'm not sure, you have a photograph of a leadership council, right? And then if one or two of them fall out of favor, they brush them out of the photograph. So the next time that photograph is published, they're not there, as if they were never there. Similar way here, in the historic record of the popular mind, that whole contribution of all senses is just brushed out, as if it was not there. This is talking about millions of people and so on, right? Same way with slavery. The whole problem of slavery has been just downplayed until recently there's been a little bit more talking about it. But still, we do not know much about it. We haven't done the, even a tiny 1% of the investigation which could be done as to what happened here, right? And somehow this inferiority complex persists in our people. They still think these people are better, more learned, more advanced, and so on and so forth. But the people themselves here, sometimes they get shocked. There is a book by a very, very prominent Indian social scientist. His name is Ashish Nandi. The name of the book is The Tao of Cricket. This book is written after when India, for the first time, defeats England at cricket. And is trying to show the reaction of the English. For the English to think that how can the Indians beat us at cricket? This is now everyday event, but that time it was a shock. But how can this happen? How can these people beat us at cricket? Cricket is our game. We invented it. We know everything about it. How can these guys beat us, man? It's just not possible. And it's like driving them mad. Ashish Nandi has done a very good book showing that it nearly drives them mad, that how can this happen? But you see the mindset which is being developed. However, as we see that when we move to these things closer to our time, the contribution of religion to this conflict is becoming less. Only in the background, the previous episodes, but other than that, there is no overt religious tone to this kind of hatred or whatever. And we come to racism. Racism develops, and obviously a lot of progress has been made in the last 50 years against racism. But still it is there. I mean, it is there in a very, very strong sense. Just to give you an example, I think it is 2 weeks after President Obama was elected or inaugurated, Professor Gates, not Bill Gates, but Professor Henry Gates, I think his name is. He's a very prominent Afro-American professor in the United States. Professor Henry Gates came to his home with his driver, and when they reached his front door, Professor Gates found that he has forgotten his keys somewhere. So he didn't have the keys. So obviously, as you would do normally, he asked his driver, can you get the spanner from the car so we can at least open the door and go in the house? Whilst they were putting the spanner in the door, police came and arrested them. And they said, Who are you? He said, Professor Gates said, I'm Professor Gates. This is my house. I said, no, it can't be. In this area, we do not expect a black person to be living. And they arrested both of them. And it took them 2 days to release him. And Obama was in a dilemma whether to criticize the police or not. This is his first 2 weeks. It was a big test for him, which he didn't discharge himself very well. But this just shows you what racism is, right? This is one of the most prominent professors in the United States. It's not like it just happened to be for them in the wrong area. Although it was his house, a normal thing, if you forget your key, you would try to open your door in some way or another. And so on, you can document that. So racism is still there. Legally, it is not allowed. But in terms of attitudes and things, but I don't know how much of racism is religiously motivated or how much culture takes from religion to justify itself. I mean, for example, we cannot say that Muslims don't have racism. They have, when we know. And I recall that one day, one of our very close friends, who is from Africa, has become Muslim. He came to me and he said, Iqbal, I am going to leave Islam. I said, what happened? He said, when I listen to all of you and myself, and the more I learn, I find that the son of Adam who was not good was black, and the son of Nuh who was not good was black, and everybody who was not good is black. So what is in this religion for blacks? Anybody who is not good is black for you. I said, you're right, but this is not the fact. This is society's imputation on that. Nowhere it says he was black. Or for example, those of you who have listened to this story of Layla and Majnun. So what was the problem with Layla? Why did his family, Majnun's family, didn't want him to marry Layla? Because she was black. They said, how can you find beauty in this black woman? We will give you fairies, fair-skinned fairies, as many as you want. Just leave this obsession you have. That's why he was called Majnun, crazy one. But the question was racism. It wasn't anything else. So we cannot say that we don't have racism amongst Muslims or Muslim culture or parts of peoples who are Muslims and so on, right? And a lot of us are from Africa and we know this. We don't need to really reiterate it here. But you can always, and this is one of the things which this mission of Imam Hussein teaches us. You can always go to the sources and you will find that this is wrong. As Iqbal says, एक ही सफ में खड़े हो गए महमूद और अयाज न कोई बंदा रहा न कोई बंदा नवाज. In one line stood Mahmud of Ghaznavi, who was a big king, and Ayaz was his slave. At that time, nobody was master and nobody was slave. And in the Quran also we find these kind of things, that it is really the brotherhood which is important, or in Iman. No color, no this, no that. So whenever there is injustice coming, we can always go and say this is wrong. And I'm sure in Christianity also you can find this kind of sentiments, right? That this is wrong. So racism wasn't, in a sense, religious I'm trying to bring this forward because next tomorrow we want to see what is the problem today. Is it in religion? Is it in other factors in society which creates this problem? And then translates back into religion somehow or another. And who are the agents behind this problem? So now what we see is that Europe, which has gone through the heights of power, then the depths of the wars, which were really, really costly and terrible, then losing all the colonies, for them this is a big loss, and now trying to live with people who were once their subjects and saying, I mean, so you go to this, some of these general assemblies of the United Nations and they say, but how can you accept the majority vote of all these peoples? Yeah. We know more, and how can we accept their majority vote? And this is a sentiment. That's why they formed the Security Council, which then is the final one. You say, how can we give a vote to, Ghana, and this, as Trump says, the shit countries? See? This is still the sentiment. But they have to come to terms with it, right? So in terms of bringing people to Europe to work, for example, we will talk about formal immigration tomorrow, but today let us see the German initial experiment. The Germans, before, of course, East Germany and West Germany were united, realized that they need labor. So they started to bring people from Turkey to work. And in Germany, still in many cities, there are large Turkish populations. Now they call them guest workers. So this was an official term, which means you come, you work in your youth here, then you go back. You have no rights here. Only work, make money, and go back. You will be guest workers officially. So they tried that for a long time, seeing that. And then some of these people, many of these people said, is it worth it to give my best years to them and then come back and do nothing? Then slowly it evolved into allowing formal immigration and citizenship and so on, and all the other issues which we will see tomorrow, and which is also part core of the problem of what is going on today, right? So we have got this mostly non-religious or not driven by religion changes in Europe and the United States. Of course, one of the things which happens after the Second World War, because the main colonial powers, France, UK, England, and Germany, and Holland to some extent, become very weak. So most of the management and plunder is now taken over by the Americans. They substitute the British for the oil resources and all kinds of other things. They just say, you go home and we will manage it now. You become second fiddle to us. So again, for Europe, this is a big shock, right? Somebody else, a new thing has come, which has again taken over. And the United States was, of course, a colony of ours before they got independence, right? It wasn't like an independent state. It was a British colony. And you remember the tea wars and all kinds of wars before then they got their independence. But it was a colony, proper. So now this has become bigger than us and telling us what to do. This was, of course, formalized in the 1956 Suez crisis. You know what happened in 1956? Britain, France, and Israel decided to gang together and attack Nasser in Egypt. For some reason, the United States didn't want it. So they told these three that get off. Otherwise, we will finish your currency. And these three had to pull away and realize who was the boss from then on until today. Okay? So, but those are changes, these are not religious changes now, these are different. The only place where religion again came was that after the First World War, the position of the Ottoman Caliphate became very problematic for both the Ottomans and for Europe. And so eventually, the Ottoman Caliphate was dismembered and Ataturk took over Turkey. But the other parts of the Ottoman Caliphate were taken over shared by British and French interests, including the Hijaz, which was, of course, now we call it Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, Palestine, and Iraq. Tomorrow we'll see how, by a series of false promises and subterfuge, they messed up the whole of Palestine and laid the grounds for implanting a Jewish state in the middle of Palestine. That again brought a little bit of religious conflict into motion, because obviously this was a political problem, but also because of the religious division. The dismemberment of the Ottoman Khilafat created another problem for Muslims, saying now, how shall we, what is our vision of rule? Do we have Muslim rule? Can we have nation states which are Muslim? And eventually this turned into something like the idea of an Islamic state, which we had until the Arab Spring started to collapse, and we will see that tomorrow. So again, that was a little bit of a Islamic flavor, if you like. There was a Muslim reaction to colonial designs in the area. But on the whole of the confrontation between Muslims and Europe was not based on church issues. The church did not have much to contribute there. And finally, before we take it up tomorrow in detail as to what can happen and will happen, one other thing started to happen. The church itself, Christian churches, you're not the church, started to lose its followers. The number of people going to church, believing in Christianity, practicing Christianity, started to fall. And there was a rise also of militant secularism. By militant secularism, I mean not those people who say, I don't believe, fine. Say, I don't believe, but if you believe, you are stupid. You are irrational. You are inferior. And trying to force you down. So these are people like Richard Dawkins, and this lot of these guys in the media and so on. Yeah, stupid guys who think that if we believe, we are somehow dumb and daft. We should see the light and not believe. There is no God and forget about it. and they want to thrust it down. They don't want to live and let live, right? Even yesterday, I think there was news that there's a huge outcry that they want to force they want to stop the teaching of creationism in Welsh schools. You know, creationism is like a Christian response to Darwinism and so on. It says that yes, we have been created by God. If we have evolved, it doesn't matter, but essentially we have been created by God. So these guys are saying, no, you have evolved from nothing. And you have to teach that to your children, that you are not created. You have evolved from nothing. And that is coming to us as well after this LGBT stuff. So watch out how it is coming, all right? So this militant secularism also has put the church on the back foot. And the church has to be fighting. Even now, for example, one of the 2 or 3 of the big fights in the church. One is ordination of women, which is a big controversial issue. I don't know, I haven't studied the theological underpinnings of the Christian idea of ordination of women or so on. It is slowly being encroached upon more in Anglican traditions than in Catholic traditions. Difficult to find a Catholic woman priest. The other one is this whole, question of divorce. As you know, in Catholicism, there is no divorce. It's not possible. And birth control. Again, Catholicism, there is no birth control. But it is being practiced. So, for example, I always like to say that when I went to Ireland first time, something 1982, something I think, all the taxis at Dublin Airport were 7-seaters, which means big families, yeah? Even today, if you have 3 children and you want to give, difficult to find a taxi which will take all of you in one, right? 2005, I think, when I went back to Dublin, there was not a single 7-seater taxi. It's all gone. So family sizes have become small. So I asked somebody, she was working with us on trying to do research or whether Muslims will like Islamic finance products or not. She says, everybody says yes, but they don't seem to be taking it. What's the problem? I said, you are all saying that birth control is not allowed, yes? She said, yes. But birth rate is falling, so how does it possible? I said, okay, I now understand. I said, fine. You see? So things are moving and the churches are under some pressure on many fronts. And they don't know how to respond. Because now when their congregations have shrunk, it's probably possible to argue that we, Muslims here, have more people on a Friday in mosques than churches on Sundays. And we are only 5% of the population. So this is a big challenge, right? And then they are challenged in provision of foster care, adoption. So these militant secularists are saying, you can't refuse to foster somebody who is not Christian, or adopt them, or you can't do this, or you can't do this. If you want state money, you should be free to adopt everybody. See, we can't. If we are Christians, we have to have some boundaries and some principles. So they are under a lot of pressure as well. Fortunately, this is bringing them closer to us because they realize that we share certain values, which is what we will see tomorrow, inshallah. So, in sum, I think what we have seen is that the enmity between Muslims and Christianity especially is of a different kind than it was historically. It is not a religious enmity. Christians are not threatened by Muslims or Muslim belief. They are beginning to understand. And if you go into these interfaith forums, and I remember I went into one of them first, and I said to them, I said, look, as far as we are concerned, we have no problem with you. You are people of the book. You are recognized in our books. If you do good deeds, Allah promises you salvation. What about you? Can you recognize us? They have a problem, right? Because either they say you are heretical, or you are born of a slave wife of Ibrahim, or lesser wife of Ibrahim, or this or that, or all kinds of things to show that we are not really, God's people. So for them to come to terms is a bigger challenge than for us. We can easily accommodate Christians or Jews. For them to come to terms with us is a very, very big challenge, and that is where our challenge will lay. So now, my brothers and sisters, where we have reached in these 4 sessions is to be able to show that there has been a very complex interaction between Muslims and Europe. Some of it has been very fruitful in terms of exchange of knowledge, ideas, and passing. Some of it has been very acrimonious, religious times like crusades and inquisition and so on. Some of them that has been more political, like colonialism and so on. And now that whole thing, that whole background has changed. But because Europe has decided to forget or park the good parts, or just, brush them out of their history, the small psychological things in people's minds are all those bad things, or those difficult times, which has like crusades and so on. Because if Europe acknowledges the good things, I think they will have to reevaluate, right, that what has happened. So tomorrow we are also going to see how this understanding of the 3 religions, what we call the Abrahamic faiths, has been slowly poisoned. And now, last 30, 40 years, there has been a new narrative. They're saying that actually Europe's heritage is Judeo-Christian. Muslims have no part in it. Muslims have always been against it, will always be against it, and we should oppose it. This begins the problem and the challenge of what we will face. So inshallah, we hope to see you tomorrow to unpack that. Assalamu alaikum.
We now have time for some questions, if there are any. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for another really good lecture. You mentioned the decline in Christianity, or the people going to church and so on. Do you think paradoxically that is a problem for Islam, and the fact that Islam is seen as a religion that's growing or has been growing, and therefore there are forces at work that want to try and control that growth because they see that Christianity is going and Islam is going to take over, and hence the rise of Islamophobia?
Thank you for that. I think tomorrow we'll look at it a bit more. I'm sure that there is a little bit of it there. But why should secularists fear the rise of Islam? I mean, churches fear, yeah, okay, I can understand, right? So, as I said, if the number of people who are practicing Christians or who believe in the Christian mission, they are challenging, they are feeling that they are being eclipsed, fine. But they are not leaving churches because they are becoming Muslims. They are just going out by themselves. But even in what you say, there is, of course, there are intersecting forces here. There may be Christians who are also feeling threatened because of that, and Islam taking over. For secularists, what is the problem? So tomorrow we want to look at how it has sort of crystallized into Islamophobia. Racism, yes, all kinds of other things, yes, but Islamophobia is something very strange from secularists.
So, sorry, I missed your previous talk, so maybe you mentioned or discussed this. So you talk about how the kind of nature of the relationship between Muslims and Christians has changed, and that colonialism was more a political phenomenon rather than a religious conflict. But actually, if you look at kind of colonial history, a lot of it is trade and missionizing forces and the establishment of churches. So why do you see that as less of a religious phenomenon than, say, previous times?
You're right that in many instances, colonialism was accompanied by missionary activity or facilitated missionary activity, as I quoted from Bishop Tutu. That is the nature of the thing. Sometimes it had religious overtones, that especially in apartheid and things, they had the superior race based in Christianity and so on. But I think on the whole, compared to the time of the Crusades, it wasn't like killing Muslims. It was more converting them, which is a slightly different, but not in big numbers. They couldn't do it. They tried, because obviously the two main religions in the world that time and even probably today, which are evangelical, are Islam and Christianity. Right? They believe both that one day everybody will become Muslim or Christian. So it is our mission to do that. Catholics did a lot of that in South America. The Anglicans tried in some of the colonies. So, for example, if you look at India, where they had near total control for quite a long period, the number of Christians is minuscule. It wasn't like an aggressive campaign to do that, right? Or parts of Africa, yes, but not so many. And as I showed yesterday at the last lecture, they tried deliberately to check Islam, like in the eastern half of Africa, by creating the South Sudan blockade and so on. Yes, there were, of course, Christian overtones, as they were to slavery as well. But look at the comparison with the Crusades, where it was religious first, right? The whole thing, we're going to go and recapture Jerusalem or get the Muslims out or so on. And here, both, we want booty and Christianity.
Don't you think part of it was the idea of a kind of superior white Christian race, right? So this idea that you control other populations because of your skin color, but also because of your religious superiority, right? That's part of that.
No,
that
is
narrative.
how, definitely that's how it started. But what I'm saying is that slowly, the superior white stayed, the Christians started to become diluted and diluted and diluted, right? This is the problem. And this is their problem. It's good for us, but it is their problem that they couldn't sustain that Christian thrust to that, right? Yes, superior still, white still. And if you want to go further, to give you some interest. Superior male white. Okay, that's a different thing altogether.
Are there any more questions from either ladies or gents side? Okay, I guess we'll end there. Thank you. Can we have a loud salawat?